Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, as we go past noon into the afternoon, and I think we've got a very interesting session and some very excellent speakers on the panel today. And the theme that we've selected is the contours of present and the future conflicts and all. I think in the morning the chief spoke of the military engagement that India has with the global south and with other nations as well. But as we see, all these military engagements are under non-traditional security threats. And the point that I would like to make a mention of is that diplomacy always does not pay dividends. And I think in the previous session there was a talk of the breakdown of the structural relationship with China and how this has panned out. I wonder if this would have happened if India had been a militarily stronger power, which was at par with China. Then maybe we wouldn't have seen the situation that we encounter today. And I think the topics that we've selected are diverse, and the first is going to be on the employment of air power, and especially while the jury is out on the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Hamas conflict, both of which initially the impressions were that this is just get over in a week or two or three at the most. But we've seen the employment of air power in both these conflicts, and it is extremely important for us to learn the right lessons in our context as we look at it in this scenario over here today. And to speak on this subject, we have Group Captain Sartaj Sehgal, who's the first graduate of the Warfare and Aerospace Strategy program, which the Indian Air Force has started. And we've had two such programs already. The third one is going to be coming up next year, starting from March. He's presently commanding Air Force Station Naliya. Then the next issue that we're going to be talking of on the AI and ethics or something. We've there is a lot of debate on artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and these issues. While the West looks at it from the prism of risks presently, I think India looks at it from the prism of opportunity. And that is where the challenge lies, because we have the expertise available in our country, as far as brain power is concerned, to address these issues. And there is an opportunity over here as far as this is concerned. To speak to us on this subject, we have Shimona Mohan with us, who's presently with the ORF. And Shimona, incidentally, has been selected as one of the 100 brilliant women in AI ethics in 2024, and she's been giving talks all over the world. And she just told me this morning, as we met, that she's leaving ORF to join the United Nations on the disarmament. So we wish Shimona all the best. But I would say that you couldn't have got somebody better to speak, and we in CAPS would like to encourage young people like her and others to speak on these issues. The third topic on the panel is on the salience of space. I think the dominance or the salience of space is continuing to increase as we see more and more contestation, congestion, militarization, weaponization of space. And India is emerging as a major player in this segment. And how do we use that to our benefit, the military and the civil? And I think what is important for us when we discuss these issues of the use of space, the civil as well as the military domain, because the dual use technologies get employed by space, and it requires a whole of government approach. And how do we navigate this? We've got Air Vice Marshal Ranjan, who's ACS Ops Space for some time now. And I'm sure, he's there at the cutting edge of policy making and all, as far as the Air Force is concerned, as to how we go about doing this. So he's going to talk to us about that. The last topic that we planned for this session is on the the critical elements and technologies basically. And basically the supply chain, how does it affect us? We've seen the Russia-Ukraine war, and how this has became a national security dilemma for India as well. And if you go back in history, I think India got off to an excellent start along in this domain many years ago, and but somehow down the line, it was Taiwan and China which took over and surged ahead. And having realized its importance, the Indian government has taken a lot of corrective measures post the COVID outbreak. And we have taken steps to ensure that we don't fall into this trap. And again, we've got an excellent speaker, Colonel Anurag Awasthi, who's changed course from being a tank man, from the Armored Corps, to be vice president of the Indian Electronic and Semiconductor Association over here. He's been talking. He's also featured in one of the TED Talks and all. And I'm sure we couldn't have got somebody better than him to speak on this subject. So I will just keep myself at that and request panelists to speak for about 12 to 15 minutes each, since we are running late already, and leave the rest of the time for the Q&A session. So, Sartaj, over to you.
So, very good afternoon to the August gathering. Firstly, Marshal Anil Chopra, honored to be here, sir, and I hope I justify the faith you've kept in me. Secondly, I convey my thanks to Air Vice Marshal Golani, my chief instructor from Staff College, for throwing me into the deep end. But that's how we learn to swim, and I hope I again justify your faith, sir. I have come from Air Force Station Naliya, which is west of the west and the westernmost airbase of the country. And being a field man, I'll give you a field man's perspective and what the mid-level supervisors and the mid-level hierarchy of the Indian Air Force is thinking, and reading about what is happening in Russia and Ukraine, and what Israel is doing with Hamas as we speak. There are certain disclaimers before I start. The lessons will keep emanating from with each war, and there is going to be some time before we are able to take a zoomed out view of the conflicts. Studies are going to continue for a long time after the conflicts have stopped, and that is when we'll get a precipitated view of what has actually happened. But as we speak, lessons keep emanating, and we should keep abreast of them. I'm lucky that I have got two speakers from AI and the space background, so I'll leave the heavy lifting to them as far as those topics are concerned. I will focus on the lessons at the strategic, operational and the tactical level for air power in general and the IF in specific, and also for my counterparts from the other two services. All of my knowledge is based on open source. There is a lot of study going on in the service headquarters as we speak, and those are policy matters which will come out as time goes by. Jumping right into the topic. Before we start, it is important for us to have the right context before we start studying these topics and deriving lessons for what is correct for the Indian Air Force and the Indian military. It is important to take a zoomed out view, as I said, so that we don't lose the larger picture due to operational and tactical actions which are happening every day. We must compare the two wars with what India is likely to face with our two adversaries, one a superior and one a near peer. We must factor in the size of India geopolitically and militarily before we make any concrete views. We must also realize that we are a strong nation with a composite national strength which is considerable, and also our international experience and influence before we understand the context of these two wars. This is going to decide our military preparedness. The two conflicts are two ends of the spectrum. One is a classical state versus non-state, and the other one is a state versus state. Coming to what is happening in Israel and the Middle East, Israel is historically always used hard power against the asymmetric threat that they faced since 1948, episodic in nature. They base their responses on an existential threat. They have moral and historical justification to use force since 1948 and almost an unparalleled international sanction backed by the US to carry out actions related to Hamas and the Hezbollah. Hamas is a determined adversary. It's a pseudo-state and has got capabilities more than a normal terrorist group which faces Israel, and so is Hezbollah. There are no large field formations which face Israel as far as the asymmetric threat is concerned. It's mostly in urban terrain. Hamas is constrained as of now in a thin strip of land closed by all sides, one side from the sea and three sides from close borders. They have nowhere to run. They have no international support, hardly any military support from outside except a little bit from Iran and other countries. And it has been under intense ISR since decades. So they have nowhere to run except tunnel into the ground. And Israel has a free run in the air, which is what is governing their actions as we speak. Coming to the other war which we'll study today is the prolonged war, state versus state, wherein Ukraine is fighting for survival. They cannot stop fighting or they're going to cease to exist. Russia is fighting to achieve its objectives as a great power, an erstwhile great power, and will not accept a stalemate. Whether their objectives have been met is a moot point. Ukraine has been propped to near-peer status by the West, as we are aware. There has been military application of forces, large fielded formations with different operational designs as far as the ground and the air power is concerned. We must understand that military application is going to keep changing in a prolonged war, aligning itself to changing geopolitical situations and the conquest on ground. We must also understand that since Ukraine is supported by the West, and West is right now probably suffering from conflict fatigue with whatever is happening now in Israel, are they going to be able to support Ukraine for any longer is yet to unfold. Whether Ukraine and Russia are going to be able to have the logistical and the human stamina to continue fighting this war, are they going to change their objectives, is yet to unfold. And lastly, for us as military practitioners, and more specifically for air power, it is important for us to understand what we need to do in a long war. More specifically for air power proponents, since air power is the most susceptible to attrition and is cost intensive. I'll dive straight down to what is happening in Israel and Hamas, and I'll try to take out certain operational and tactical lessons from the conflict as it unfolds. Before we go into it, we must understand what is the evolution of the IDF's strategy against asymmetric threats. It has been happening since 1948 in episodes as I covered earlier. In the last 2 decades, we've had 2006 against the Hezbollah, 2009 Castlet against Hamas, 2014, 2021, and right now in 2023. We need to study all of these to get a better grip on what is happening over there. Air power has generally been the first choice instrument as far as Israel is concerned, as far as the Israel Defense Forces is concerned, followed by the rest of the forces. It's been the leading edge. IDF air power is usually applied in urban terrain, and it is usually after the wars with Syria and in the 73 war. After that, it has been mostly been war against asymmetric threats. The political objectives, as we understand, the desired end states have a direct bearing on operational and tactical rules of engagement. So we must ask ourselves, what is different at this point of time? What is 2020? Why is 2023 different? The earlier restraint and proportionality are absent at first view. And this is as not just air power, everything included. The maximalist objective of destroying Hamas will govern the military and air power usage and deployment as far as Israel is concerned. The key operational and tactical takeaways, what we study and what probably the headquarters are studying, are as follows. The joint approach. Israel has always been a proponent of the joint approach towards any threat, whether it is asymmetric or a state versus state conflict. They've always had the air power as the leading edge, carrying out shaping operations first and paving the way for the ground and the maritime forces if they are used to achieve their objectives. We also have seen that they have started using AI, which my co-speaker is going to cover on. They have a software called, they have a program called the Gospel, which is a target preparation software, which is needed to be studied by us, which gives out a prepared list of targets for a targeting brigade manned by officers, and soldiers who select the targets which contribute towards their targeting philosophy. It gives you the latest updated int through rapid extraction of intelligence and large volumes of data. Next we come to is the layered air defense. Israel has always been threatened by long-range vectors. If we take Iran into consideration, they have a threat which is by ballistic missiles, drones, you can name it. Hence, they have got a layered AD which has got systems like the Arrow, which is for long-range threats, the David Sling for the medium-range threats, and the Iron Dome, which we see is in action today against threats like the artillery shells and rockets. Costly defense versus cheap offense is the next point and a floor from the previous one. That while Israel is utilizing the Iron Dome, the enemy is using cheap systems to threaten Israel. And such systems are expensive and the weapons are short to come by. This is further complex. This is further complicated by the large number of VAs and VPs that they have to defend, the large swaths of airspace to be kept under surveillance, inability of conventional radars to pick up such threats, and lastly, they are easy to acquire. Launch and dispensable nature of these weapons make them the first choice for non-state actors, and Israel has to face this. However, we need to learn lessons as far as such systems are concerned, and probably in the future get these. Certain more operational and tactical takeaways is the capability of network-enabled capability. Israel has evolved to a concept called the one-digit concept, wherein the threats which emanate are fast and they disappear fast after they carry out their attacks. Hence, in the wars which happened earlier in 2006, when they went into Lebanon to take on the Hezbollah to get their soldier Gilad Shalit released, they went in full bore, and they faced international opprobrium, wherein they realized that unhindered use of air power is only going to put them into trouble. To reduce the response time against such threats, they went to the one-digit concept. In response to an emerging and elusive threat in built-up areas, they had a less geographical area to keep under surveillance, which certainly made it easier. Constant steering capability with near instantaneous targeting because of the plethora of sensors and shooters they had in the air, since there was no air opposition, and they reduced the response times to less than 9 minutes. And in certain cases, wherein single rockets were being fired, they reduced the time to less than a minute. This is aspirational in nature because of the geographical expanse which is facing Israel is very less, but it is again a capability which we need to think about. In the Hezbollah operations in 2006, as I covered, they faced international opprobrium, which probably went against their larger strategic goals. So in 2009, when they went in against Hamas, they decided to recalibrate their approach towards the curse of unintended effects and collateral damage. The Israelis went into a thought process which I'll cover and I'll read out. The requirement was not just to identify the right target and strike it at the right time, but in the right place, also with the right weapon and the right fusing. This is what the Israelis decided to do. And they managed to do it to prove to the world that Hamas is going to be fighting, keeping civilians as a shield. And the Israelis have to give a response in urban terrain, keeping the civilians in mind. And they succeeded to a large extent, wherein they pushed the Hamas back and the rocket firing operations stopped for a certain amount of time. So there was certain success in the way they used air power at that point of time. While we talk about it, it is important for us to understand that they also realized that there is something more to it. There is something more to than just time-sensitive targeting. They realized that has to be mission-sensitive targeting, keeping their overall strategic objectives in mind. Hence, in some circumstances, they said the speed of decision-making may be less important than the accuracy of the decisions made. And this is something which we need to learn, because on our western borders, there is increasing urbanization, and tomorrow we might have to fight in those areas. And it is important for us to keep the collateral in mind when we go into battle in those areas. The key takeaway, as far as I am concerned, in 2023, whether the objective of destroying Hamas completely leaves any room for any discernment as they had in 2009, while targeting is a moot point, as the objectives are completely different. We must remember they are out for complete extermination of Hamas. Hence, the way air power, and not only air power, also military power, used as the instrument is completely different. And it depends on the political directives as far as Israel is concerned. It is easy to vilify air power, but we must look at the way they use their military power as far as political directives are concerned. Come to Russia and Ukraine, the key strategic takeaways. We must look at Pakistan and China, the philosophy of unrestricted warfare, written by Colonel Wang Shui and Ching, and the hybrid and asymmetric methods of Pakistan. We have to juxtapose what is happening in these two wars against what we are going to face, and we must look at it through our prism and tailor the responses according to our circumstances. While Colonel John Warden was advising the US government against a future war with China, and he had the following to say, and we must take a leaf out of his book, that prepare for full-scale war and not just skirmishes. Prepare well and visibly, just don't depend only on deterrence. Ukraine could not deter Russia from finally walking in. Prepare well and visibly. Be prepared for multiple parallel attacks on multiple centers of gravity, and be prepared to function in a multi-domain operational environment which encompasses from space down to direct military attacks. And lastly, it's important for us to understand that duration is in the hands of the adversary. No one was prepared for a long war. Russia was certainly not prepared for a long war. We should keep that in mind and ensure that we equip ourselves and train ourselves to be able to sustain operations, be resilient, be able to recycle our manpower, replace trained manpower which we lose, and ensure that we have logistical sustenance to fight a long war against our two adversaries. The only way forward is to indigenize, and Atmanirbhar is the right step, is the step in the correct direction. Certain operational and tactical takeaways. Shaping the battlefield is a sine qua non. We understand that counter-air operations, as is our philosophy, is doctrinally what we desire and what we will do. We need to shape the operation in such a manner that they contribute towards progressing the operations of the other two services. Offensive operations are a must, and we must strike the enemy at the root of his air power. And this is where probably Russia missed out a trick, wherein they started well with counter-air operations, offensive operations, with SEAD and DIAD. However, they could not maintain the tempo, and it petered off, allowing Ukraine to regain and recuperate. Battlefield transparency is again a must. Both the sides have had adequate battlefield transparency, more so with Ukraine. We must attain battlefield transparency, but on the other side, we must remember, if we are able to see the enemy is also able to see us. Hence, deception at the strategic, operational and tactical level is a must. And we as proponents of air power and the military at large should understand this. Air-land operations. This is a favorite question of everyone, whether CSFO or coordinate actions, as our latest doctrine says, how they should be progressed. In my opinion, without having requisite control of air, counter-surface force operations are going to be suboptimal. This is what the Russians also faced, wherein they went headlong without giving the air time to shape the battlefield, and their ground operations got stuck on all the axes which they went in. Thereafter, they had to pull the chestnuts out of the fire. They went in low levels, not catering for the AD threat, and suffered casualties wherein they had to recoil. We must understand the advantages that persistent air power gives to the other services to achieve our objectives. Info dominance using all means, as I had already covered, from space to EW, IW, PSYOPs, whatever is at our behest should be used to have information dominance to gain battlefield transparency. However, we must remember that while we are trying these, we have to ensure that we deny physical and virtual access to the enemy about our information. Open source intelligence is nowadays very accurate, and we must try to extract the maximum out of that. Resilience to attrition is important. Our air bases are our source of strength. We have to protect our air bases to maintain the operational tempo. Hence, we must have the resilience to bounce back from an attack, since the enemy is going to attack. Whether we are going to disperse our assets, strengthen the infrastructure at our air bases, everything is going to contribute towards resilience, and more so in case of a prolonged conflict. Layered AD is a must, and we understand the concept. So does Israel, so does Russia. while we are getting long range vectors, which we are, so are our enemies, we must understand that offensive operations and air denial go hand in hand. Both are together as far as your strategy is concerned. Hence, we must be able to operate in an area which is replete with long range vectors in the same common battle space. That includes manned and unmanned platforms of all the three services, and still be able to retain the freedom to carry out our actions. The danger of manpads is understood. Russia suffered, and we should be careful about where we go before we, how low we go before we carry out certain attacks. It is important for us to shape the battlefield in such a manner that we are able to carry out operations from our chosen levels and stay out of the envelope of the manpads. Urban targeting in low contrast environment is very important. Why I call it low contrast is because it's very difficult to know who's friend and who's foe. Tomorrow we are going to fight a battle on the Western Front. It is very, very urbanized. To avoid fratricide, it is very important to coordinate actions with the ground forces and have absolute clarity as far as ISR is concerned before we go in. Survival in a dense AD environment. As I just covered, long-range vectors are very lethal. We must understand that we must go into the low observable aircraft technology, which the F-22 and the F-35 are demonstrating, and the AMCA, as far as I'm concerned, is a step in the right direction. We have to learn how to fight and survive in an A2AD environment. Ground unit survival is extremely important. They are 50% of our strength. They have to have a light footprint. They have to have less administration and logistics requirements. Any SAGW unit, that is a SAM unit or a radar which is taken out due to enemy action, is going to create a hole in our air defense cover. Precision weapons and targeting philosophy are extremely important. Our targeting philosophy must ensure that we use precision weapons which are extremely expensive to create a condition wherein we are thereafter able to use cheaper weapons to give adequate weight of attack and destroy the enemy. That is extremely important. This is what Russia is learning to its peril. Even the United States is having a trouble trying to supply Ukraine with precision weapons. So pacing out our innings is extremely important. Surface-to-surface missile deployment, cruise missiles and hypersonics are extremely important, but remember we have to have a balance of long-range vectors such like these along with manned platforms to be able to achieve our objectives. Unmanned platforms in contested airspace has been proven it's a 50-50 game. We all saw how the TB2 Bayraktar was successful in the initial stages, but that is primarily due to the incorrect application of the incorrect thrusts, which the ground thrust which went in, wherein a lot of destruction of armor was done. Later, when the Russians got their act together, we've seen a lot of casualties. We've seen a lot of attrition as far as such platforms are concerned. It is important that we use them not in a standalone manner, but probably embedded in a larger package which will increase their survivability. Standalone in a contested airspace, it is extremely difficult. Low-cost drones are here to stay. We have to acknowledge it. Attack with low-cost drones is an opportunity. We must harness it. However, they are also a challenge, and the Indian Air Force is looking into defense against low-cost drones. Training in an integrated environment and for complex missions is a must. The Indian Air Force is doing it. The PLAF and the PAF are also exercising together. Where the Russians missed a trick is in their exercise such like Vostok, which are mostly tied to the ground, and they do not have experience in large force packaging. They had operational experience in Syria and in Georgia, but that was only 2 aircraft and 4 aircraft. That weakness has been probably exposed now. How it unfolds later is yet to be seen. And lastly, training during wars for replacement of valuable crew as far as air crew is concerned and ground crew is extremely important. We must look at quality manpower, and we must look at how to train them as fast as possible to pump them into war. The earlier days of Battle of Britain, wherein a pilot's expectancy was just about 48 hours, will not cut the ice. We have to have trained people because they're manning very expensive platforms. I will finish by saying that these two conflicts, as they unfold, will continue to bring out important lessons. We must see them through our prism. We must adapt to the lessons which emanate out of them, and thereafter decide our future military trajectory. And I finish here. Thank you.